This is a Alpha 1 Gen 2 water pump service, and the first thing we start by doing is splitting the drive shaft housing from the gear housing. So we just pop the plug out, undo, this is a 1/2 inch socket to undo the anode plate, flat anode plate. The 3 litre engines that don't have power steering will have a fin. Fin's adjusted to correct for steering bias. Next thing we do is remove the screw from in under here. Sometimes it's a cap head screw, sometimes it's a hex head screw, just depends on what Mercury happened to have on the shelf at the time. So that screw's out of the way. A couple of 5/8 spanners, and we undo the 4 screws holding the 2 halves together here. Now what I did when I bought this engine 7 years ago is, before it went into the water the very first time, is I took these screws out one by one and put a layer of Aqualube or Aqua Shield onto each of the bolts and screws. What normally happens is, without that there, the water seeps into the cavity between inside the drive, and then starts to swell up and actually cracks these nuts, breaks them. As you can see, this is the first time this has been off in 7 years, just like the day it went on. So we undo those 4, so there's 2 on the other side, 2 on this side, and again, there we go, that's the Aqua Shield doing its job. We have another screw at the front, we undo, there, that one is one I forgot to put Aqualube on, so I won't forget when we put it back in. Okay, now these drives are doweled. There's a dowel pin at the back and the front. They're very, very tight. So what I use is a rubber hammer. If I can find it, there it is. And I just knock the back end up until I get a small gap here. I can just get a screwdriver in and prise it apart. Alright, once it's prized apart, you'll feel it go loose. You can then lift the drive shaft housing straight up off. Normally, you'll get a big wad of oil come down, and that's completely normal. It doesn't indicate that there's seal leaking or anything, because this spline is actually oil bathed on the Gen 2s. So we just clean the oil off that shaft and off the top of the water pump housing. You also find it quite common that you'll get a collection of rust pieces, quite large pieces like this. That's what's left of your elbows. Elbows and manifolds corrode, and that's where they end up if they haven't been shot down the exhaust cavity. So next what I do is I check this shaft area, and I just run my fingernail down it. If there's any grooving there, indicates that you've got a seal problem. That one is absolutely smooth. This drive's got 320 hours, 7 years, and this is the first time it's been apart. We then lift the seal. This is a V seal. You can see the shape of it there. See the Ving, and that sits flat down on the housing. Now we'll get to that when we reassemble, because there's a setup procedure for that. Next we've got some screws holding the water pump housing on, and I use a 5/16 socket for these. Remove all 4 of them. Again, these are ones that do get a bit of water into the threads, and the salt gets in there and can make them quite tight. So before we put those back together, we'll be cleaning them and greasing them. Then just lift the pump straight up like that, and we see our pump impeller in there. Now because that's been sitting there for a while, it's going to have a set. Even if it's only been in there a week, it's going to look like that. With a bit of time, it will start to straighten out. Now what I look for is wear on the edges of the blades. You can see a very, very slight amount of wear. You can just see a hint And what that is, that's where the water pump's been, or the impeller has been passing the outlet side of the housing. The other thing we're looking for, usually most people after 2 or 3 years will toss that. That one's 7 years old, by the way. We're also looking for a groove in the top of the housing here. There's a very, very slight one I'm just picking up with my fingernail. Not enough to warrant a replacement. If it's heavily grooved, then yes, definitely replace it. And we lift the plate off, we take the key out and we lift the plate off. Again, we're looking for grooving, very, very minor. So that one I'll just take the gaskets off, put new gaskets on. As it's 7 years old, I will be replacing the impeller, but if that was only 2 or 3 years old, I'd be more than happy to put it back in. The other thing we look at is just generally condition of the drive. We're looking for heavy corrosion around the top of the gear housing. We'll also check the condition of the quad ring. This little O-ring here seals the oil passage between the top and the bottom housing. And if that's in bad condition, or, as a lot of people do, forget to put it back in when you're assembling, then it's going to leak. We'll come back to this when I've cleaned up the parts and we're ready to reassemble.